Welcome to the Ardan Labs Podcast. Our special guest today is Delaney Gillilan. Hey, I said it right. Nobody
Pretty
thought I could
darn
do
close. Yeah.
it. you say your last name, Delaney.
It's Delaney Gillilan. So
Gillilan, man. What kind of name is that? Is that like
Scotch Irish.
Scotch Irish, man? I guess that's the test if you're drunk or not. You know, officers say your last name, son. Gillilan.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Very accurate.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man. I mean, I shouldn't be laughing about your last name. It must have been tough growing up a little bit.
Well, it's funny because technically the Irish one would be like Gillian, but like in English or American English, you would say Gillilan. So it's wrong in on every level. So I'm perfectly fine with just going by Delaney. In fact, we probably get into it, but like when I had a stage name, I went by Delaney J because in fact, my GitHub is Delaney J because Gillilan is too hard for most people. So
yeah, who wants to have this conversation every time you meet somebody?
Every time, yeah.
I know it's hard. Like I appreciate the Kennedy name, but two things happened to me with Kennedy. All right, one, they asked me if I'm related, which honestly I don't like that question. One time I told a guy, I was frustrated that day, and I should never have said it. But he asked me if I was related. And I said, if I was related, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. And the guy ended up being this wealthy man. And he said, no, you would be. And then I just felt like shit after that.
The one thing that I will say about having a rough name is that it's been great. My name is my first name, last name at Gmail. My accounts have always been like first name, last name. There's almost never a Delaney. It works out in the long run. So I'm thankful for it now.
Yeah, the first name is good. It's super unique. there's nothing to say there. Sometimes people don't know how to spell my last name, which I find...
Really? It's pretty common in America. Yeah, it's a pretty Americanized name.
Like it's the president. I don't understand that one. You know what drives me crazy though? And I have a cousin whose first name is Kennedy. That fad that one doesn't make sense to me. People using Kennedy's first name.
I'm definitely not a social media kind of person, but it is funny that there is another Delaney. That's the guy behind Fireship, but that's his last name. So if I can get on there, then it'd be two Delaneys. Like it's the two brothers thing from Rick and Morty. So
man, crazy. Okay, enough about that kind of stuff. Delaney, right? This is a show about you, but give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. What I primarily focus on is I work at Synadia, and I work on the helping customers with a tool called NATS. If you're in the Go space at all, you might have heard of it. It's for doing real-time messaging systems. And part of that is to show off a really good backend. If we're doing demo, I do a lot of proof of concepts for customers or for demos and stuff like that. And one of the things that's really hard is to show off how fast and amazing it is. I was a user years before I joined the team. And part of that is showing off demos, and things like React and Vue and all this make that really difficult. And so I ended up by accident basically coming to create a new JS framework. So it's been 0 days since the JS framework has come out. But it's really, the irony is that it's more of a shim to get you back to hypermedia and to do things in a secure way that's not like other frameworks. It's more akin to like a HTMX and Alpine put together, but smaller and more focused, if that makes sense.
Do you have any product in production using this new framework? I don't want to call it a JavaScript framework, so this new framework.
Yeah,
we got to give it a new name, Delaney. We can't call it a JavaScript framework. What are we going to call it?
Well, I called it a progressive performance hypermedia framework. And we can get into
progressive A, performance P, hyper H, APH.
Well, so funnily enough, we actually have a friend in common, David G, and he actually has a whole site called gonads.net, which is the Gonad stack, which is Go, Nats, DataStar together. So it's pretty funny that he owns the Gonad site. Yeah,
I don't know if I like that name. It's right on the edge of being a little foul,
I know it is pretty funny. There's a couple of other ones in the Discord channel of people using it in other stacks with Clojure and TypeScript and all these other things. So there's not a good name for it, but it basically is eschewing a lot of the things. You're basically putting state in the right place and doing things more in the back end where they should be. That's
I feel like you must be, the first time you found out somebody was using it in production, you must have panicked.
I've been using it actively because the thing is, it's only doing the stuff that you absolutely need to in the front end. Basically, you're letting a web page be a web page, and you're sending down fragments, much like HTMX, but you're doing it in a streaming way. Ironically, not really, because a lot of the heavy lifting was done by things like Idiomorph, which came out of the HTMX community. I basically was hooking up things, and the code's so simple. The entire framework with every single plugin, everything's a plugin, but with every single plugin is around 12.9K. So it's tiny and it's pluggable, and each piece you can pull out. So I actually wasn't that surprised by it. And the thing is, I know it's being used in some top secret military stuff, which I can say that it's being used there, but I can't say what it's being used for. It's being used for some medical imaging and for doing inferencing stuff in AI, because basically it allows you to stream things down in a very efficient way.
But it's streaming HTML down.
So yes, so in general, what you're doing is using SSE. I felt like, so if you've ever used something like HTMX, or if you know anything about this space, basically what their premise is, you send down a template. That template then has hooks in to say, I want to grab a partial of an HTML page and pull that down. So instead of sending down JSON and converting that into VDOM and then creating something on the page, you're just taking the fragments directly down.
I feel like it's almost ASP, but instead of getting a full page rendered server side, you're getting parts of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very accurate in that regard. The thing that I thought was smart about what Carson was doing, the guy behind HTMX, is he was sending down these fragments, but it wasn't enough. Like, I think he had some really smart ideas, but he didn't go far enough. And what I mean by that is I'm relying on SSE, which is a streaming format, for sending down multiple fragments from one single response. Also, I can send down signals. So one of the things with HTMX, there's no reactive state on the front end page. You have to add Alpine or HyperScript or some other thing to handle like forms and animations and that kind of thing. Well, we just built that in. So we have reactive signals, which is similar to Solid and all these other full frameworks, front-end frameworks, but we're doing that reactively for you. And so you can send down fragments, you can send down signals, you can send down scripts to execute. So all these things are able to be sent from the backend side. So for example, if you want to reload a page or redirect, you can literally do window.location on your backend and send that down and automatically do redirects and do clever things there. So
have you given talks and demoed this stuff? Because now I want you to demo it. I want to see it. I mean, yeah, we can't right now, but do you have like video or?
So yeah, I didn't not too long ago. I'm very much not a public person when it comes to development stuff, but I did a talk at Utah.js. And what I did is actually showed off Synadia Academy, which is an internal project that basically is doing real-time 3D engine UIs built that are actually teaching how to use Nats. And the interesting thing is I'm sending down thousands of elements as web components in a 3D engine. So I'm controlling a 3D engine using DOM elements, and I'm doing it with thousands of elements on the screen at 140 frames per second. And the flame graphs are in the sub-millisecond. It's actually really hard to test. So
I feel like this isn't anything you can monetize, but you should be monetizing it.
Yeah, I've thought about the general gist of what you could do with it. I think the crazy thing is that it's taking the ideas of HTMX and Alpine and saying, hey, first principles, if we started over, what would it look like? And I think that it's completely a different dynamic. It's not HTMX, it's not the fragment stuff, and it's not SPA. I say on the number line between SPAs and fragments, it's an imaginary number. It's such a different way of looking at the problem. And I'm going to give you a perfect example of this. Here's something that's like really simple in my world, but it would be normally hard. Let's say you have a form that has to go and kick off a bunch of different servers in the background, right? Like you say, I want to start this process, this ETL job, and it has to go do a map reduce across all these machines. Normally, with a normal response, if you're doing a React component or something like that, and you send off the response, you have to wait. Basically, you're sending off a request and saying, okay, I'll get back to it later, right? Like that's just the normal way you do it because you can't wait around. Well, with the SSE approach, it's just like sending down JSON, but except for it's in chunks, right? So you can send down a chunked response, just like you can send a chunk upload. You're doing the same with the download, which means I can start responding to you immediately saying, hey, I've started this service, I've spun off this process, I've done this. And so you can wait till instead of waiting until the entire response is done, you can be getting a live action detailed view of what's going on.
It's almost like having a WebSocket without that complexity.
Yeah, so it automatically reconnects. It's a standard HTTP call. People keep saying that like it has to be more complicated, but it's literally just instead of sending down JSON, you're sending down small little chunks of text with new lines in them. That's literally all a SSE event is.
We do that on the LLM side when you to make a streaming call for the response, we're using that SSE there.
So imagine if you could SSE, but you could also do it with post, patch, put, get on any backend and actually have a defined set of being able to send down fragments or send down signals. So let's say there's part of your page that's the DOM is the DOM isn't changing, but the contents is changing, right? You can send down a signal. So instead of sending down entire fragments that have to be updated, you can send down just the part that's updated, and it instantly handles all the reactivity and the re-rendering of all that for you without VDOM or anything like that. So you can get crazy fast responses. In fact, if you go to the DataStar website and look at the bad apple example, you can actually I'm streaming down live a ASCII music video on a free tier Flight.io server from anywhere in the world, and you're getting 30 frames a second, and I can get it up to 50,000 frames per second.
This is crazy, like mind-blowingly. Like, I don't know why I'm just hearing about some of this now.
Well, I think the thing is that it doesn't feel like the leap. I think it's really neat that HTMX is starting to get a little bit of a name nowadays, but I don't. This is such a different departure. I think it's taking people some time to see. One of the problems is I keep showing these like real-time streaming demos, right? I keep showing these things that are like games or real-time demos, and people think, well, that's great, but that's not what I'm building. I'm building a CRUD app. And my point is, my way works from CRUD apps all the way up to giant scale applications, and there's no change in your workflow. So if you send down 1 event or 0 events or 10 million events, your code base is completely the same. Does not matter.
So you know what gets interesting here is debugging, because you do get the ability to have a debugger in production when you're leveraging JavaScript there, right? But everything for you is happening server side. So you're back to those sort of back end techniques and logging and stuff to debug things that are happening now on the front end, right?
So here's the thing that I get to look at. What's the stuff that's in the front end stays in the front end. So you still have all the debugging that's happening of like, what's the state of like the interactions directly here. But also there's so little of the code. So the irony is that if you're doing a DataStar project, maybe 2-3% of your entire project is going to be, of your front end is going to be DataStar, because all you're doing is hooking up these. So the reason why it's called DataStar, for people, I keep forgetting that people don't know because I kind of live in this space. There's a set of elements that are built into a HTML element, and it's called data-star attributes, which basically lets you hook and put in any data there and still be a valid element. So you can do data-foo-bar, right? And inside the thing, inside of the attribute, put some kind of string. So it's literally just a string map that's valid JS or valid HTML, sorry. All I did was I basically wrote a parser that takes the key and the internals and turns it into a reactive expression and allows you to hook into it to write plugins. So I wrote plugins for SSE and classes and basically everything you need to build any front end in the world. I built it so that you can have these things in place. And the irony is that by building it in this plugin architecture style, it's tiny. It's actually 50% smaller than HTMX and includes everything that HTMX can do, plus the streaming, plus everything Alpine does. And it's actually unified. And part of that is because they have a lot of overlap between each other. Like they disagree about who owns the element, who owns events, all these things. So there's all these parts of building up a bunch of libraries and trying to smash them together into a framework. We know about each other and we can actually make smart plugins. So even though it's a library, we come with every plugin that you need to be a full-fledged framework.
Yeah, I'm on the data-star.dev site now while you're talking, and I'm looking at some of the examples, and I got to dig deeper, but no, that's some cool stuff there.
Yeah, I've been excited about I definitely am not a JS framework guy. I don't like JavaScript. I like TypeScript. I used for quite a while, but the thing that's been the real value to me is what is the least amount I need to do to get the state in the right place. There's times where front end state should live in the front end, 100%. Like if you're doing local storage or online, offline, or events, that's where it should live. But most of the time, people are putting stuff on the front end that they shouldn't be. Until not too long ago, had a top secret clearance. I worked on a bunch of military and kind of other applications, and security to me really matters. And there's nothing worse than oversharing data. And I think that there's over a long enough time period, you're going to overshare if you have some GraphQL or JSON-based API. Like you're just going to overshare data. And to me, that's super dangerous. So moving to hypermedia first, if you're on a browser, makes 100% sense because you're only showing what you need to show. And a perfect example of that I keep going back to is a bank account. If you're on a bank site, there should be no information in there other than like if you're on a transfer page or if you're on opening a new account. There should be no other state in that page, and that state should only exist for that moment, and everything else should be based on cookies and based completely in the back end. So getting to a more immediate mode style where no state lives in the front end is A, faster, and B, more secure.
Yeah, I don't build complex front ends, but anything I've built application wise, I try to make the front ends pretty dumb and ask for the data it needs and render that and not try to do anything. Plus, I'm afraid somebody's just going to right click and say inspect and start like digging in there. Like, I mean, I don't know enough to necessarily secure all that either. So
yeah, it's impossible to secure. That's what I found on a long enough timeline with more than one person working on it. You cannot keep it all in your head. And the thing that people have said, especially against HTMX and stuff, because it's polling based, well, yeah, that's great. That's really cute, but it's not fast enough. I just sent Bill a link to an example that used to be when React first came out. This was the big demo of like, hey, look, we can do things at 20, 30 frames a second in a DB monitoring situation. And on a free tier Flat.io server, we're doing updates in microseconds to that database table. The same demo, basically, just ported over. And the point is that if you can be fast enough, you can simplify your model a lot. And that's the beauty of where I think you can go with this kind of stuff, especially with Go. So one of the things that I think Go is actually absolutely amazing at is that you have these ideas of channels and Go routines, the green threads, make things so much easier because then you can be push-based. So instead of polling constantly and using up a bunch of data to try to recreate the world, I can keep the state of where I'm at and what the person's interested in, and then I get pushed events, whether it's through Nats, through a key value watcher, or through a Go routine, doesn't matter. And then I get pushed, and then I can re-render something and push it down to the user and do all that filtering stuff on my side. And it makes your code smaller, simpler, and it actually uses less resources.
I'm always in conversations with, if it's fast enough, don't add any more complexity. A lot of times we need complexity because it isn't fast enough, and then we've got to do more, right? And so that's what you're kind of saying is this is fast enough. We don't have to do anything more to it.
Well, and the thing that I think is really amazing, and this is where I say we're a progressive performant framework. Sorry. So being a progressively performant framework means that we're fast enough that you can send out, like, let's say you're doing a table, right? And then you want to add a new element to it. Well, you might have changed some other things, or rows kind of get offset, all these things. It's fast enough that you can send down the whole table fragment. And because you're doing a push-based interface, sending that down when something changes is really easy mental model. You just do you just do your rows and you send down the whole table. That's way easier mentally. But if you're like, this isn't fast enough, you can update any element on the page with this SSE approach. In HTMX, that would be called an out of band swap. But with us, that's the default. Like, why not be able to update any part of the page at any point in time? So a lot of times, mental model wise, you can just redesign the whole table and it'll automatically get sent down, or you can get really efficient.
I've kind of seen our industry go through this cycle a couple times, where in the 90s we couldn't trust the CPU that was running on the client, so we did everything on the server side to try to minimize the amount of CPU we needed on the front. Then suddenly we started feeling confident that all front ends had enough CPU, so we shifted everything to the front end to do and minimize the back end, and then it happens again, and then it goes back again, and you're kind of coming back again going, hey, we could do more on the server side because we trust the CPU there. Let's say more than front end.
100%. And I think it's not so much trusting the CPU anymore, it's trusting the user. And what I mean by that is most web applications are doing things that have real life consequences. So if you're playing a game, in a single player game, hey, guess what? You can do it totally on the front end, right? But most web applications are dealing with bank forms, are dealing with your 401k. These kinds of things are the things that you actually interact with, your email accounts. You don't want to trust that person with any more information than you absolutely need to, and you don't want to expose their data. So it's now fast enough to do things properly that we used to go, because a long time ago, I mean, not that long ago, I mean, have gray hair we both have gray hair for a reason, right? Not too long ago, you would be building up a giant JVM thing on Glassfish, and then every request was a per thread, like a real thread as opposed to a Go routine or something. Going to the backend was really costly. Keeping an open connection was really costly. You couldn't just have infinite connection. You couldn't have 10,000 people on a single core. That's like just unfeasible. So hardware and the way that NIC cards and all that stuff has changed enough that we can do the thing that we should have been doing in the first place, but it wasn't fast and efficient enough. So my thing is not about, hey, I want to shift everybody back to the backend. It's like the only reason why we went there was for good reasons, that the backends weren't fast enough, and you couldn't. And when I say fast enough, they couldn't have all the threads and have these open connections stuff. It just was a non-possibility. We can do that now. Okay, we fixed the one part that was broken, got fixed, especially in a language like Go, where green threads are just native to the language. There's literally no reason to not do it this way, because this is putting state in the right place.
Yeah, no, very, very, very cool. We could talk for another hour, but I'm going to shift some gears, and then we're going to come back to this. I see how passionate you are about it, and you're right? Like our programming languages have started to allow us to leverage more of the hardware in more efficient ways, so we can shift things back, right? But it's that same dance I was saying. Let's do it here because we can't do it there. Now we can do it here. Let's do it here. But you know what? Now, back and forth. So we're coming back this way now, which is interesting. It's cool. Even though I've got more CPU on my phone than I did on my machine in the 90s at my desk, right?
Yeah, but you have the same user issues. That's the thing. It's you have the same humans on that device. That's the key that I think we need to make sure to look at.
All right, Delaney, a couple things as we're already like 20-something minutes in, but as we get started, I want to know what year you graduated high school and where you were at the time.
Yeah, so I graduated in 1998, and I was in Las Vegas doing shows and stuff. I actually went to school out here and was doing performing here in Vegas back then. So yeah.
Yeah, don't say share more. I want to hear about that, but don't. I'm gonna keep you on our timeline here, and then I want your first clear your mind. I want your first memory that you have of like working on a computer. What's that first memory that pops in your head?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you it was third grade with an Apple IIG in doing Odell's Lake and Oregon Trail. That's 100%. That's the first memory of it. And then didn't have access to a computer for a little while and just started doing the library books on the basic, just doing it in your head because didn't have the computer at home. So yeah.
This Oregon Trail game pops up over and over and over again, and I somehow missed it. But the author of this game has influenced so many people. I should look up who that is because this comes up all the time.
Yeah, it was two guys, and it was a educational company, and they were kind of trying to find a fun thing. It was like a side project, if I remember right. Yeah, it's amazing. It's a really solid game, and the thing is, that you could finish it in a time period because the computer labs you only got 20 minutes to be in there, kind of thing, as a kid. So the fact that you could get through an entire game in 20 minutes, same thing with the Odell Lake kind of thing. It really did make it was the perfect amount of time for that kind of interface.
How interesting is that thought? Like if this wasn't an accident and they had enough realization that this kid was only going to have 20 minutes, so we got to build a game that can be solved fairly reasonably in 20 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's amazing. Like it's such an interesting idea. And the nice part is it was almost like a roguelike because you had the mental model of like, hey, I'm going to be a banker. Hey, I'm going to be a guy that could shoot a gun really well, take a lot of bullets. I won't take meat. Like you could basically work through, and instead of getting new power-ups each time, you were getting the knowledge of how the game mechanics work because you only got little snippets of time to do it in. It was a great experience. So
no, I know me because if I was even 25% through the game and it was time to go, I may not have left the chair, right? Like you don't want to leave. I got to finish. Saved a lot of kids too from catastrophe.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting to see what was possible with just a few pixels on screen. It really was one of those things of how you got an entire story out of that, and you learned stuff. Like you learned the trek. Like I knew spots from Wyoming where I'm originally from and stuff just from that. Like it was pretty neat.
Wow, that's super interesting that the game even taught you some of the landmarks and things in your own state. You know, it's kind of funny. I don't know why these weird thoughts pop into my head. I live in Miami. I've been here a long time. I know how to drive around. I still always put on the GPS because sometimes it knows something I don't. And I go down certain roads that I've never gone down before in 20 years. And I'm like, there's a park there? What? Wait, there's like even that happens.
Yeah, I live in Vegas, and we destroy and build ourselves up all the time. So I've seen that since we moved here. It was maybe 150,000. Now we're like 2.5, 2.8 million people. So yeah, that I don't trust myself with GPS anymore. Even for places I felt like I really understood. I'm just like, cool, just tell me where to go now. Like everything's changing constantly.
Yeah, I don't really mind using it. Especially like here in Miami with traffic and stuff. Sometimes you don't even know what's happening. So tell me about high school now. Like what were you into in high school? What were you doing in high school in those like 4 years from, I guess that would have been 95, 6, 7.
Yeah.
8. Yeah.
So, I kind of have a weird background in that case. I was doing football, and I also was very much into doing 3D art at the time. I actually went to our first magnet program here in Vegas. It was called ATEC, Advanced Technology, and they actually had a full computer lab for doing 3D art and animation, and I was really hard into that from a technical side. And then at night, I would be doing shows and stuff. I actually was a performer on the Strip at that age.
Talk to me about that, because that's super fascinating. I don't know if that was common. Was that readily available, or you just had? Yeah. Like, talk to me about how that even happened.
So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. I'm originally from Wyoming. I was born in Rawlins and grew up around Sheridan and up in the Little Bighorns and stuff. And family was down here in Vegas, and we saw someone performing, doing like a whip act and like doing a little bit of trick roping stuff. And I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I kind of know a little bit about that. I'd never really done it before. Like, even though I'm from Wyoming, I'd seen it, but I was like, people actually can do that out here. And I think that was maybe 13 or 14. And then I found out that the World Championships were like a couple of weeks away, and they were in Vegas. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I went down, and I get into my head.
Without practicing, you just went down? Like,
No. I just went down to see it. I just wanted to see it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I was
okay.
For some reason, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I feel like.
How far away is Vegas? Is it a 3-hour drive or something from Wyoming? I don't even know.
No, it's like, technically you can get there within like 8 hours, but it's more of a 12, 14-hour drive. My family had just moved down to Vegas. So.
Okay. So now you're in Vegas at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it happened to be that like saw like people doing the stuff, and I'm like, I got it under my skin of like, I think I could do this. I feel like I understand the mechanics of what's going on here. So I basically just went hard on it, basically the equivalent of going into a fugue state for about a year and a half. And then, long story short, I was really ambitious and ended up having started doing stuff for doing trick roping and gun spinning and whip cracking and doing a whole one-man Western act. And then by the time I was 15, I had my own little show at the MGM. They used to have a theme park, and then did it throughout high school.
Okay, time out. You're moving too fast. Time out. So
here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
So you see this show and you go to your parents and you're like, I can do that. And you're like, I'm going to do that. But you need to buy me a whip, a gun, and I want to hear that conversation.
Well, no, it's actually the irony is that when I wanted to do football, I didn't do Pop Warner or anything like that, but I watched the guys, and I'm like, I wanted to do this, and I wanted to play center, and I did the mechanics, did all the training. I read every book on the subject. He's like, my dad was like, you can't learn about football from reading a book. Well, I read every book, all the body mechanics, and got in there and actually made the team and did really well. Same thing with this kind of stuff. I felt like I had a decent ability to really watch someone and understand the mechanics of it. And when I saw those things, my dad ended up giving me a rope. We found out that one of the main suppliers of stage props and stuff was here in Vegas. And so he just went down and talked to the people and said, hey, I want to get my son one of the kind of rope that's done for trick roping. And he's like, yeah, okay, we'll get him a book and stuff like that. And so I still have that book up there, and
Wow.
yeah, it's just a bunch of stick figures. And like I just studied it, tried to understand the mechanics of it, and then within a few months, went down there, showed him what I was doing, and then just started like. I don't let something go. I feel like if I did that with music, I'd be a decent musician, but I'm not. Like I just understood the body mechanics of it, and
Oh, so the place that you bought that equipment from, you showed them what you could do, and they had the contacts.
yeah. So they just
Get you
started
a
getting
little
me
show.
involved
Okay.
with a bunch of the competitions and all that, and then I basically took myself to the MGM and said, "Hey, I think I could do this. You guys should hire me at 15." Like I had a lot of hubris, I guess. And
How
they
were
said,
you a big guy at 15, or were you like 120 pounds wet?
"Oh yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I was definitely like maybe 150." Like,
okay,
so yeah, I
that's
was
fair.
a decent size, like a skinny kid. But yeah, no, I just had the thing of like, hey, I'm good at this. I need to capitalize on being good at this because I don't want to work at McDonald's. I don't want to have a normal job. So this is my way to do it. And that's kind of the route I went. In fact, it was really funny. I would have guns and equipment in my bag as like a teenager. So I couldn't go through the casino and sit down because you can't sit at a machine or thing. But I had like guns and active things that I'd be taking through casinos. So
Are
it's
these
a weird
real
story.
guns? These were
Yeah,
real guns
yeah.
that were empty, obviously, but
Yeah, I use 45 Ruger Vaqueros were my main guns, and yeah, I mean they have blanks, but the powder's really coarse grained, so you could still like they're very dangerous. But yeah,
that's amazing. You couldn't even do that today, right? Like
probably
things they were
not. There's a
doing
lot of
today.
things that you probably couldn't do. I have stories of that world for sure, but it's a
And
yeah,
these
it's a very
shows were on
different
the
world there.
weekend, right? Not during, not. Yeah, I mean, you had to go to school.
No, I would go. So the irony is that actually during the summer, the shows at the MGM, for example, I would work all summer, and couldn't drive a car yet, so I'd actually have to take the bus, and then my parents would pick me up at night, each night at the MGM. So that was how I got started, and then got hooked into some circuses, and then started traveling around for quite a while, and then yeah,
Did you
did that for
think
quite a while.
at some point in high school? Two questions now. Are you still focused on any sort of compute? I mean, you're doing the graphics, so I'm guessing you're thinking. What are you thinking with the graphic skills you were
So
going to do after high school?
No, it's a
Was
good
it
question. Basically, I knew that there was a certain timeline of me doing this crazy, interesting job. Like I went off and joined the circus. Like I did that before I finished high school, right? Like I did that style of life. But the funny thing is, once you get your act down in what you're doing, there's only so much unless you're getting into some harder things. You're kind of done. Like you have that to act and you do your thing. So I had a lot of downtime backstage that I'd be just sitting there. Most people would be reading or like not scrolling their phones. Phones weren't really scrollable back then. But I just got a laptop and kept doing the 3D thing because I was like, I knew there was a shelf life to this lifestyle. Like I saw what the coaches had to do that did this kind of stuff. Wasn't I wanted to do, but I wanted to spend my basically prime years that I could do this kind of thing doing it. So I knew that there's always an exit strategy to do something in tech. And I love doing 3D and I love doing technical art. And that led over time, I kept doing 3D, worked on some games, got into the slot gaming space in Vegas and started building art assets and stuff in that. So I was working, even when I got out of high school, I was working a job doing 3D art during the day and then I'd be doing
How
shows
did
at
you
night.
get that job? Was it all just connections, being in and around the MGM and stuff like that?
Well, the thing is, no, I knew people. Like I had a roommate during the .com times where I was doing. I don't know if you remember the MS Agents at all, like the little, like the clippy style characters.
But now you're out of high school, so
Just barely, yeah. This is probably like
yeah.
2000s.
So before you tell me that, right? High school's ending. You're doing your show. You're still focused on the 3D, but high school's ending. So is your idea to just not, like, we're not going to do university, I'm going to continue? Like, what is your thought process coming out of high school?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the thing is, during the shows at night, I still had the days open, right? Majority of the time. So I actually was dual majoring in comp sci and electrical engineering. So I was trying to do, like, I love the idea of both of those things. I love the idea of making things. So I was like, this is where I want to go. And then while I was doing that, I was building the 3D assets and then basically got a job offer working inside of basically a think tank for doing the equivalent of game engine design stuff for slot machines. It was a project called the Alpha Project. And I basically got asked to come into that. And so I didn't finish my degree. I just said,
So you decided I'm gonna go to college, but the college is during the day. My shows are at night. Your college decided it was computer science, but still wanted to do the graphical stuff. And then you found a way to do that with a paycheck for those slot machines.
yeah. So the thing that was interesting is even though I love doing 3D, I still think being a technical artist, I still think is the hardest job that people don't realize in that space, especially with game development. The thing is that I saw what the engineers made and I'm like, ooh, that's like way better. And it seems like an easier job. Like, again, hubris of saying, hey, that seems like a better long-term thing. So I wanted to understand it at all. Like, I felt like I really had a solid grasp of how to do 3D, but having a degree in something that I felt like I need to learn more about was valuable to me.
But you ended up leaving university. You didn't finish that degree. I'm like, how many years in? Like 2 years in?
Yeah, 2 years in. Yep. That was right at 2 years.
And you did that because you had more opportunities to make money at that point.
Well, I already had the job that basically you would hope for if you came out of school for that. So I was like, I'm already doing the work. I think that it's one of those weird situations where you don't need a degree to be a good engineer, especially in the software development space. As long as you are really focused and really understand the ideas behind it. Like, that's one of the weird things is I will dive deep into a process, just like I did with the trick roving or something, right? Like, I want to dive in and really understand the process. So I have the Knuth books, read through them, like cover to cover, run to understand them. But also I don't know if I could pass a leak code example test. So like, I like to dive deep, but I don't like to just do things for academic purposes. I'm very bad at that. So if I have a real world thing to solve, I love it.
Right. But if I gave you the cracking the code interview book, which is pretty big, and you spent 2 months on that, I have a feeling you'd be able to like answer all those questions really, really well.
Maybe. I know that I have a trouble doing this kind of standard interviews just because I'll ask you, why are you doing that? What have you looked at? Like, if you're doing this process, I'll be like, well, first of all, let's look at the cache lines of what you're doing here. Why is things done this way? What metric are we trying to hit? Is it a latency issue? Like, I'll start asking a million questions. Like, that doesn't matter for this. And I'm like, no, it does, because people always do a thing of like a hash map is the fastest way to do a lookup. It's like, well, but if you have a linear array and it's within 4K, it's the same cost of doing one lookup. Like, you're not correct. Like, I don't know. Like, there's a certain lines where you have to really understand the hardware. And I feel like a lot of time with software development, you get told like the O of N problem, but you're like, okay, what's O and what's N? Because it really does matter on hardware.
Yeah, so you drive the other person crazy, in other words, Delaney.
I mean, yes, that is an accurate reason why I don't interview well. That is completely accurate.
Have you met managers that have been able to tell you to like stop, take a breath, slow down? We'll talk about those things, I promise. But
yeah,
focus here.
Yeah, I've had a few really good, solid managers. I've been really lucky in my career to be around some really solid ones. And usually it's people that really understand the problem that they're trying to solve. Like, if management actually understands what are the problems and what's the focus and what are their long-term goals, then that's great. But that's not usually what interviews are that I've seen lately. Is they're very much a leak code. Can you reverse a binary tree, which does not come up a lot when you're building web UIs. So I think we have a disconnect there.
No, I'm doing interviewing now, and I think the technical interview is a bit broken, for sure. I do some live coding with the person with I would call it a simple algorithm that should take 10 or 15 minutes together to sort of solve without you needing Copilot or anything else. I know there's others that give you an exercise that would take an hour or so. I just want to know that you've written code before at some level. Like, I can't assess if you are, just by watching you write code, I can't assess if you're here or here. Plus, I ain't saying who, but I've helped friends with coding exercises that they were allowed to take home, right? And I've walked it through them, and they could go into the interview and talk it up. But could they reproduce that?
Yeah, it's a hard balance. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm just complaining that I'm terrible at it. I'm just saying that I'm bad at it. I do love the idea of the take-home interviews, but also a lot of times it depends on what they're asking you to build doesn't match the kinds of things that they actually build themselves. So it always depends, right? Of course, it's an engineering problem, so it always depends.
So you quit university. I guess you go full time building all this 3D art for this stuff. How long are you with that company?
So for example, I worked at Sierra Design Group, and then that turned into Ballet. I was with them for off and on for over a decade or more, because I would go do other jobs as well. So during that time, I basically was building 3D art. I probably built or deployed hundreds of games in that space, in like the slot and poker gaming space, as a 3D artist. And I kept writing tools for other artists and keep writing more and more tools. And that led me to just being a full-time engineer working on engine stuff. Because I really do think if you're a 3D artist, you have to understand shaders, you have to understand GLSL, you have to understand these low-level concepts that even most what would be considered developers today don't really understand what's happening on that low level. And like learning GPU first and learning C first as a 3D artist, I think it really does change your mental model of what the computer's doing and what things are like. And that's why things like OOP never really jived with me. A lot of the things that were popular when I was coming up, I was like, I don't get this, but I can make really good art. I can make really good tools, but it doesn't match your guys' style. So I thought I was a crazy one.
Oh, no, dude. When I first saw OOP, I lost my mind. I'm like, wait, you want me to do what? And do all that? And do more of that? No, this makes sense.
Yeah, I do think that starting in game dev really did change my mental model, because I did things. The interesting thing about slot and poker gaming, that side of gaming, is that even art has a lot of regulations around it about what you can and can't do and what you can show, when things have to be available. And I think it really does change your mental model for what you can show to someone. So it's a lot of times people talk about optimistic updates and stuff like that. And they're basically lying to you in that you click a button and it says, okay, I submitted that form. Here's the results of it. And then it goes to the server and then comes back with like if it did actually work or not. I think that style is completely broken. And I think doing things where there's legal ramifications to tell someone that there was a payout changes your mental model. So I want to have updates as fast as possible. Show me an indicator that things are in process, but don't ever lie to me. So I do think that having this mental model has helped a lot. And I went from doing slot games to actual games. So I worked at EA for a bit and did like regular game development too. So I think that mental model has helped me so much in how I approach every problem, whether it's from art or code or anything. Like think about it from a game developer's perspective, really does change the way you look at the world.
Yeah, I love that you got that education early on and got it and sort of put the person first. I got similar sort of education in the beginning of my working career too, which has really helped tremendously. So, yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, at that point okay. So then how long are you at that job? And then what happens next? So you're at that job at 98, you graduated high school, 99. Like how long were you there? 2 years, 3 years?
No, I did game development stuff for like 10 years. I was doing it for.
So you were there for 10 years.
Yeah.
You were there till like.
I was doing it a long time.
So like the 2008 or something.
Yeah, probably around there, yeah.
So you must have climbed the ladder there.
I actually pushed down on the ladder. I didn't do the management track. I didn't do anything. I really found that I am better at writing and making tools and being a developer than I am a manager. I'm not very good at that. I can manage a project decently well. Like I can actually produce like useful things, but I'm not a good manager of other people because I feel like a lot of times people want to scale up by just adding more people. And most of the time it's like, that just tells me you don't have good enough tools. Like you shouldn't need this many people for me to need to manage somebody with the kind of projects that I've been working on.
But I imagine that you're good at taking a problem, identifying all the different pieces of it, breaking that into tasks, even if it's for yourself, and then knowing what to attack first.
Yeah, I think so. My big thing is I like to be responsible for, like, I like high risk, high reward where it's my responsibility. Maybe this is some of the like circus and heights. Like I'm terrified of heights, absolutely terrified. And I'm like, oh, what's the right thing to do? Go do things with heights and stuff. And like what I found out is that you never get over your fear of heights. It does not happen. You just learn to deal with it. It never goes away. So my thing is I love breaking down a problem. I love but I also want to take full responsibility for it. So I don't like putting like my design onto someone else. That's something I'm not good at, is saying, okay, go do this thing the way I want you to do it. I'd much rather say, I'll do it. I'll take over any part of this. And that's a character flaw. Like I would probably be farther along in a career if I was more managerial in those tasks. And I'm very bad at that.
my concern with that sort of attitude is that regardless of how good the code that you're writing is, you're not working on it forever. So somebody has to come in behind you, and if they can't do that, then all your work gets thrown out.
See, and part of me is like, that's okay. Because to me, code is a ephemeral thing, but the data lives forever. So I'm very much into event sourcing and CQRS and these things of like, events are the events, and your idea of the mental model changes. I think that the don't repeat yourself is really an interesting idea, but in general, you're not the same person that looked at that code yesterday, let alone within a year. So things, to me, like, find the tools that make sense, but be willing to throw them away. But the data is the part that's really interesting to me. So I don't care as much about my code. I care about the data that it produces and it interacts with. So that
But
may be a character flaw.
That's fine. But I paid you to write that code, and I can't have my investment in your time be thrown away because you don't care about that. Like, you see what I'm saying?
I absolutely 100% see what you're saying. You're absolutely right.
It's super interesting. No, it's interesting.
Yeah, the thing is that my hope is that unless the problem changes, the code should last forever. Like, that's down to like fuzzing and testing and understanding what you're building. And if you're building lower level things, that's really important. If you're building a UI, that UI is ephemeral and you should treat it as such.
And if I was managing you, I would say to you, you're going to make sure that these 3 other human beings can take care of this code base when you're gone, right? Like, I would almost push that and be patient with you, but sort of try to drive that into your head, right? Like, that's your to me, the worst thing you could ever say to a software developer, I think, is I hope that by the time you retire, not a single line of code you've ever written is in use or making a difference anywhere. To me, that's the meanest thing you can say, because it's like the fruits of your labor. Every party you missed, every event you didn't go to because you had to write that line of code was now for sort of not. That's what's in my head.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is I see it in a very different approach, but maybe we get to the same road. And that my thing is, I hope, for example, DataStar, it has a lot of things I thought were like solid ideas that were a decent attempt at things. I hope that none of my code lives in DataStar more than 5 years. And the reason why is I hope someone comes up with a better idea, that I spurred them to be a better version of that code base, that there's a better version of that plugin. There's something smarter. There's something that comes out of browsers that makes it so that you don't have to do all these steps. So I see it as just another link in the chain of developers working towards their goals. So if nothing exists, but it spurred the development of the next thing, great. Like, I'm okay with my code not existing forever. I don't want to be in that COBOL, Fortran style thing of banks where they can't move on because no one understands it. I don't want that to ever be, because the thing is, I feel like if you're long-term lazy with your own code of saying, I'm making this as approachable for myself because I know I'm going to forget things. Start to get older, you forget things, right? Like, you have different mental models of what's important to you. If I can go look at my code and know exactly where I was at and understand the reasoning, hopefully other people can too.
No, I hear you, but I think there has to be a balance there too,
100%.
right? So it's just interesting. Yeah, these are the fun conversations that I have. But I think from a business owner, being the one investing the time and the money, slow down. I'd rather take that resource and not write something better if that's working. I'd rather build on top of it. Like, you see what I'm saying? So it gets interesting. So you're at that job for 10 years. You're doing all this engineering. You're really at a low level from a performance because you're really thinking about cache lines and how much time that line of code costs, because you got to do things within a certain amount of time. Like I love the game developers because they have to think at that level, right? There's only so much you're allowed to do in this window. That means you're only allowed to execute N number of actual instructions. So what are they going to be? So you have all of that. 10 years goes by, and then what?
Then I started doing more in this space of, for example, that was building games, and then I did things of logistics around actually running casinos. So it's more the actual monitoring logistics of the machines. And I worked on a set of systems for that, for real-time monitoring of casino systems. So that got me more into the whole monitoring side and building distributed systems. And ironically, that actually brought me to Go, because believe it or not, I was doing a lot of that stuff in Node at the time. And I ran into things where you do ETL type jobs and the memory would be off like crazy high, and there's all these problems with it. And then I like basically switched it out with Go over a weekend, and it was a 20th the memory, and it was 12 times faster.
But
and
what year is that now? 13? Because
yeah,
Go...
probably around 13 roughly.
Yeah.
Then yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of picked it up a little early, maybe 14, but I just saw the value in what it could provide. And I'm like, wow. What's really crazy is that it felt like a weird combination of Go feels like a scripting language to me. Like it's Python with classes is what it felt like at the time. It very feels scripting language. It's so fast that you don't need a scripting language. It's so fast to compile, and you get a result that's really good. Because a lot of times when you're doing game dev, you have a C or C++ engine, and then you add Lua or something because the compile times get too high and all that. Go had this beautiful ability to be simple enough that it felt like a scripting language, but you get all the performance that you need, and you can be really fast.
So I'm super curious now that you're sort of gathering telemetry and looking at machines and stuff. Are you using this information to figure out where to move machines on the floor related to sort of payouts and making sure somebody saw somebody win? And are you using that to some strategic there, or what
so,
is
yeah,
the purpose?
The floors that we did, basically the equivalent, what's crazy is that there's the casinos that you're used to seeing, but also in Vegas, you have these almost like in a strip mall, you would have just a place with like 15 machines, but you'd have 100 locations in the Valley. Well, now you have like 1,200 or you have 1,500 machines, right? All of a sudden that you have to, it's a distributed problem. Whereas the casinos, they actually have a lot more information about exactly the machine they're in, whereas this is a different kind of distributed problem. I will tell you from working in the slot gaming space, 100%, all of those numbers are tracked. You know exactly which bays are in. It's almost like a convenience store or a Walmart where location of your game matters a ton to the actual payouts. I can go into the weeds on that to an nth degree if you wanted to. So all that stuff matters, but the problems that I was dealing with when I went into what's called a route business was very much just the scale of having a ton of machines that now have to be serviced, plus all of each place has basically equivalent of a convenience store and coffee and liquor and all these other things. So you're doing, it's more about the logistics of, hey, we know this machine's about to run out. We need to get someone down there for this service call. This person is on this track, so we have to get them on a route because it's all around the valley. Like Vegas is a pretty big valley for being just basically one city.
So you own the retail store too that the machine was in.
Yeah,
they were doing all
soup to nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. My uncle loves the slots, and he had a couple of years where he put like $80,000 through the machines and made $5,000 at the end of the year. Like, and all the free concerts ended up. You start adding it up, right? Like, and he knew he knew every the 3 casinos. He would know where the machines when they were moved. He knew the locations in those spots where they were putting the hot machines. He'd be pissed off if somebody was sitting on his machine. So from a consumer point of view, I learned a little bit because he got like sort of deep into it. It wasn't just random for him. He had strategies on the 3 different places that he was playing. And like I said, he put 80,000 through the machines. He made maybe $5,000 at the end of the year with all the free concerts and stuff. But that was his entertainment in his eyes. He wasn't trying to generate income. He was just trying to be entertained.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting space. I never thought I'd be in it as long as I was, because I had a coding partner that's really close friends with that guy Somberg. He's funny. He's wanted to do audio engineering for games, and he went off to do that in San Francisco. We both were working on GBA title stuff together, and he decided to go off, and I decided to stay in Vegas. And he went off to have a very illustrious career doing hardcore games. In fact, when you say he wrote the book on audio engineering for game programming, he's written like all 3. So like it's a different style. Like I was at EA for a bit, and like there's 2 different styles of game development. There's very much the corporate style. I worked on The Sims a bit, and then there's the indie game style. And so we actually started up a game studio right around the 2013 time period and started working on our own games at that time. And that is a world that left me. Indie games is a hard business. I will tell you that. That is a rough road.
I've met a couple people that every waking hour they weren't out of their apartment. They had Unity up, and it was like I spent a week at a friend's house, and it was the same screen all week. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. And the thing that I learned a lot from that is that we made actually a really solid game. This is back in 2012, 2013. We made a game called Minion Master. And the idea was that you would have a deck of cards and you would basically interact with a real-time strategy game that was happening live in front of you. And you could affect the game by playing the cards, but you could play an entire RTS with thousands of individual units and you could play it in 5 minutes. So we're like, hey, this would be really fun. And it was a fun game. The problem is understanding marketing. We should have done it on mobile, like all the things that, like, we made a great game, but didn't know the first thing about marketing or really running a business. And it taught me a lot of like, hey, even if you're really good engineers, like everyone involved went on to do really interesting things, but we were just terrible as a company. Great game, terrible company, terrible messaging. Like we spent money in the wrong places. We focused on the wrong things. And it was very humbling that just because you're good at one part of your job doesn't mean it's usually the part you'd spend the least amount as a business owner. Like if you're good at 3D artist, well, yeah, I'll get 3D art done. Now I have to spend all this other time with everything else. So
yeah, but that you have to learn that. My first business, I lost a lot of money because you could look back on it now. I had the wrong partners. We didn't raise the right amount of cash. We bled. I could go down a whole list of things I will never, ever make a mistake on again. Right. But until you try and fail and learn, I mean, you don't know, dude. You just don't know. Now you do.
I do know, that's for sure. Well, I thought, hey, I've been successful in all these other things. I will be successful. We're going to make a great game. We made a great game and we didn't know what we were doing. Like it's a hard road to hoe that. Like that's not enough.
Here's the best part. You're not wondering what if. Even
That's
with all the time and money I lost, I'm not sitting here going, what if.
Well, and we were pretty smart where we basically left like at a little bit above. Like we were good. And they were like, okay, we're getting done now because we don't see the road ahead of us. We're basically at the end of a runway type situation. And yeah,
it's hard to do.
It's
hard to quit. We didn't. We just kept going deeper in debt, waiting for it to turn. And then in 2008, the mortgage crisis hit. And that was like, shabba! Like all the money was taken from us overnight, right?
It definitely hurts. So but again, it's a good lesson, and I'm really glad did it, and still really close friends with everyone involved. Like it's nothing. We just didn't know what we were doing. Like no one does unless they know what they're doing.
What year is it when you sort of finished with all that? Because you said you were 10 years, but you were going 2013 with it. So like, what year is it when you're done, even with the managing of the retail stores and the slot machines? And
so I probably did that till. I was doing that roughly till maybe 5 years ago, maybe. That's about when I was doing that stuff. And then I wanted to change because it basically got boring. Like once you set up a logistics set of systems, and if you're doing a right job, it just runs, and you're kind of just sitting there like for fires. And there's not a lot of fires. Once you have a business in place, you're done. So I was getting a little antsy, and I decided to want to do some startup stuff, and then got involved in some military startup things for a couple of companies, and then ended up getting top secret clearance and working on real-time systems around that.
I mean, that's not easy to get those jobs, especially if you don't have clearance already.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that to me is impressive to be able to get a job in that space.
Well, I got offered, basically, I had someone that knew me from the game engine days that said, hey, we have issues in our front end. So I usually get hired on as a back end engineer. But the thing that I found is that because I kind of do full stack, because I was an artist before, like because I kind of think of things in a holistic view, I've realized that most of the time, most projects actually need a front end engineer or a front end architect. And what I mean by that is you can't show off a good back end, and you can't show off what the system's capable of if you can't make a front end that really understands what's going on in the back end. And it's not just like throw JSON over the wall or throw GraphQL on something, like really understanding the latencies and what's happening. And so that's where I keep going with my career at this point in my life, is that I keep going to be a front-end architect to help the back-end team make better examples of what they're doing.
And then how long are you with the military? Because that must have been really exciting in the beginning, but I imagine there's also a level of stress.
I mean,
that comes with that.
Yeah, there's real world consequences to things. But again, I've always kind of gravitated to those kinds of problems. And I like that space. It feels like you're doing something that matters. So there's definitely something there that's really interesting. Like I got to do some visualization stuff for a NORAD project for U.S. Cyber Command. Some interesting things that I can't really get into, but I will say that I'm proud of the work that I did. And part of the things that I was working on was actually working on next generation systems of like, okay, we're okay right now, but this will not scale to the problems that we're moving forward with. And so I got deeper into not so much database design, but basically how do we leverage and utilize the databases that are out there in a smarter, better way to do things like event sourcing and CQRS and all these kinds of styles of things. So I got more and more deep into what it means to really understand data at scale, and not just volume, but also latencies.
So then what year is it when you decide to sort of get out of that space? And then, because you said you did that you got out of the other gig in 20, it's now 24, you're working at Synadia, right? So
I left doing the military stuff because I actually wanted to start my own startup. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to get back into the fold. This is not a game development problem. But basically, I still have the site, I still have all the code base, but I was working on something I called the event graph. And basically, it was kind of my opus of I think I can solve this general problem. And it kind of looks like the equivalent of both a Merkle blockchain and what Datomic does in the closure space. So having access to trillions of points of data and yet still be highly distributed and get access to that in milliseconds. So that's what I was working on.
So what's the business problem? Why am I paying you $1 for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every problem that I tend to work on, if you have a real world impact, you have to have history, right? And logs are not good enough. So I want to know who knew what, when, and why. And being able to solve those kinds of problems is, I think, paramount. And a lot of work is done to try to recreate state. And I think most people throw away their state when they don't understand the business value of it. So I can take the equivalent of a database and say that is just a hash in time, and you can query any point in time with any query that you want to, and building it in a way that's efficient to do that and know who made the change where, while still dealing with things like crypto sharding and PII and all HIPAA and all those kinds of things. So
have you heard of a product called Pachyderm?
Yes.
Because they were trying to give you that sort of point in time version of data, so you could do regression testing on old data, new data. I always thought of Pachyderm as almost like Git for data.
Well, and I think and Datomic's very similar to this. My only issue is that the way they built it is not built for outside vendors to do. Like, you have to really embrace that technology, whereas I was building it so that we could be a global supercluster and do all these crazy things. That's how I got involved more deeply in NATS, but also down to a single binary that I can run locally and have that full interaction at a local level and have the same code scale to those differences.
Did you have a customer already in mind when you went and did that? Because I feel like it's so much easier to start a business when you kind of already lined up somebody to use it.
Yes. It's primarily for military usage, because there's a lot of times with that where you have to know at high scale who changed what when, and like there's a thing called kill chains, which is a whole other process that you can't really talk too much about, but there's a lot of things where it doesn't matter who knew what when. Those are the kinds of problems that there's just not good tools for out there. And the thing is, I think it is a general solution, but yeah, I was looking at stuff that I already knew in the military space because I already know problems that exist in that space today. So
you built this, but you couldn't deploy, you couldn't use it.
So I was in the deep in the weeds of building it, and I started asking a bunch of really, I was asking about the elliptical curve stuff that NATS was using and all that, and started talking to Derek Collison behind it, and then got a call from the sales guys that said, "Hey, we'd like to have a technical kind of advisor to help on these sales calls. Like, you know what you're doing here." And I was like, okay. And what I was running into is I was like, hey, I have to build a UI, I have to build a framework, I have to do all this other stuff before I can even start working on the problem, the thing that became DataStar and all these things. And I want to know NATS better. I want to understand how NATS works at a deeper level. And the opportunity came to be part of the team. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't looking for this, but man, this seems like a really smart group of people, and I have a lot to learn. So it was a great opportunity to join.
I almost feel like this is I'm going to say it, I don't think it's the right way to say it. the least technical job you've had since you started? Or
Well,
where does this fall?
the thing is that you're solving doing the sales stuff. I did not end up staying in the sales job for more than a year. We'll say that because there's a difference between sales and saying, "Hey, I think you can solve the solution in a better way." Right? Like I'm not really a good sales guy, but I love Nats. I think Nats is absolutely amazing. I think the company's really solid, but that's not always the best salesperson to help you with. But I work on some of the teaching stuff and also building a lot of tools behind the scenes. So that's the stuff where I feel like I'm a user of Nats way more than I am a you won't see me on doing commits on the open source thing. But my thing is focusing more on the customers. And I feel like I do understand that from a outside user. Like I was a customer, I want better tools for people like me and people that know less than me. Because right now it's very much power users that use Nats.
And then I would say that DataStar is scratching all the other itches that you're not getting at Nats.
Well, the thing is, I'm still solving hard, interesting problems, and for me, it's more about the products. So, if I'm working on stuff that's actually being beneficial to other developers, it doesn't need to be a hard problem if it needs to be done. Like I'm working on a user interface now for like taking streams and being able to do queries against them and do full text search and all these. Like I'm doing some interesting things that are going to help magnify everybody else's usage. Like that matters to me more than just a technically hard problem. Yes, I work on technically hard problems, but that just becomes part of the job. Whereas this is like, I'm actually working on a product that's actually going to help thousands of developers, I hope. That's exciting to me.
I'm sure you're getting some pressure, or at least you've been chewing on this whole AI craze. So has LLMs entered into your sort of picture yet in maybe Nats being some data source for an LLM prompt or something like that?
I mean, I have been using Copilot for quite a while, especially with Go. I'll tell you, man, Go and Copilot go really well because if error gets real easy when you get a certain format in place and you start using it everywhere. I think there's definitely value there. The thing is that Nats is really good at doing high availability and large scale distributed systems. And I think that tying into, because it has the ability to do load balancing and request reply and key value and object stores and work queues and all these things, it allows you to build these things up. I will say we're using quite a few AI products right now as the backbone. One of the things about Nats, it gets used more than people realize because most people see it as part of their secret weapon. Like a lot of LLM companies aren't actually building LLMs. They're not building models. They're just building infrastructure around these things. And I can tell you, Nats is used in a lot of places like that because it's the secret sauce for a lot of projects.
Nice. But everything's going towards how can I leverage an LM to do this and do that. And sometimes it drives me crazy because I'm like, that is the wrong tool. But Nats is managing data, whether it's transient or whether it's persistent. And when it's persistent, you can almost think of it as a data store, right? I mean, we don't want to keep data there for years, but at some level, it's a data store. And so I could see systems almost starting to look at and thinking of Nats almost as a database in a sense, right? Or where you get your data from.
Well, the way I've been using it, and this is what got me into Nats in the first place, is I think because it has the high availability built in with Jetstream and all that, you can use it as a source of truth for your events, and then you build your projections with SQLite or DuckDB or all these things, and you build independent cattle not pets versions of databases for individual queries. Now all of a sudden you have the superpower of highly distributed, highly available, backed up system, but also you can get perfectly indexed queries, which is a beautiful thing. You can be fast in every way. Like you can be fast with ingest, but also have individual perfect indexed queries, which is really exciting.
Yeah. I've tried to use Nats on a few projects. I don't ever want to use Kafka. I've tried to use Kafka too. And for me, it's like anything. Once you know something, it's easy, right? But the 0 to 60 with Nats at least it's a much faster, like within minutes I can start talking to Nats and get it running.
I actually say Nats is a lot like the game Go, not the programming language Go, in that it's very simple. There's very few rules and all that. It's about then all of a sudden, okay, what is my actual problem about? What is the topology about? How am I going to build things to work locally and both at scale? So it's beautiful in that the combinations are almost endless, but it's a hard game. Like it's hard. You have a ramp up time, but to build a full system and to really understand it means to understand your own problem. And I feel like DataStar kind of has that same mental model of it's really easy to get started, but what happens is you're now exposed to like, okay, the front end's a non-issue now. Oh, now I still have all the issues of my actual logic and state of my backend, right? Like it doesn't make that go away. It just exposes it immediately. So,
since DataStar now is sort of your baby, like how many hours a week are you trying to find to continue to sort of work on that project?
The nice part is that the V1 just went out like a couple of weeks ago. It's still in beta. We still have a couple of things that we're updating, but mostly the community has come gangbusters. I basically put out a thing in, I think, October saying, hey, I'm basically done. I need other people to start using this outside of my circle. And people have come on gangbusters. The documentation's getting way better every day. We now have SDKs for multiple languages. In fact, 2 more. Zig is dropping this week. Closure's happening today. Like things are starting to move, and it has very little to do with me. So I built the thing. I'm done, and now it's about documentation and about a better website and those kinds of things. So the nice part is it doesn't really take up a lot of my time other than approving PRs. But there's now a group of people around it that are really actively using it for production stuff. So I don't have to worry about that as much. The core idea is done, which is great.
Kevin, my producer, he just recently graduated less than a year ago. So he and I work on a bunch of stuff. He's got better front-end chops than I do. But I'm all about just using vanilla JS. We used Phaser for a Connect 4 game just to do the animations and stuff. I don't want to use React. I don't want to use Angular. I know for a fact I don't want to use these things.
Right.
So I think Kevin is there. I think this DataStar thing, we should maybe play with it for the next sort of little front end that we have to build, because it would be fun to see if it clicks in our heads.
Well, and the thing is that please reach out on the Discord. Please talk to me. I'm happy to come on anytime and talk about it, because it is a different mental model than what you've seen before. Because it's not the drop-in replacement of HTMX of I just make a fragment, I do that thing. It's changing your mental model at a deeper way. And it's a little bit more to click, but I guarantee you, once you embrace it, it's a little bit of a ramp to learn, but all of a sudden you go, oh, my CRUD app versus a real-time chat app is literally just how often I'm sending events. That's it. There's no different. Making a real-time chat app is maybe 10 minutes in DataStar. It's just a non-issue. So it's more about understanding the mental model is the thing. A lot of people find that they have to unlearn what they've already learned. And so that's the hardest part, is if you can. I think that newer people would actually have an easier time with it than someone that's been living in React land forever, because they don't think it's possible to do this. So
I love having examples, especially if there's an example that's close to what I want to do. And you have a ton of examples there. In fact, Kevin and I we're going to start doing some live stream programming. And the first thing we're going to sort of build is a chat app in Go. It's really about teaching people. I was going to do a terminal front end. Maybe we spend 1 week seeing how we hook up DataStar to the
I almost guarantee you that the DataStar version of that will be less code and it'll be easier to write than the terminal version. Because I do both. I do TUI stuff, and the bubblegum is really good, or those bubble tea. Sorry, but I think the DataStar is so much more interactive, and you can do so much more, and it's easier. You'll have less code.
I'm excited. I think we'll have to. Maybe we'll bring you on that live.
I would love it.
Broadcast when we're ready to snap a front end to it, and you can walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's any Go developers, the entire website is a one Go binary that lives on a free tier fly.io server, even though it's doing all the streaming and stuff. It's if you're a Go dev, every single example is written in Go to start with. So it's all there.
So my thought on this first sort of chat app project was to use WebSockets essentially, because I don't want to build my own protocol, just to get basic communication going. But you're shaking your head and you're saying, don't use WebSockets for this example.
So I had an interesting project a while back, which should melt people's brains if they know anything about the space. If you see my Utah.js talk, I do show a couple slides of this. But I had a project for NORAD where we basically were showing for every radar site in America, so for the continental United States, every single radar site, every single blip from every single radar site within 800 milliseconds to a browser and watching it in real time and be able to scrub it to any point within an hour. So you're talking about roughly 1 million points of data per second to a browser and being able to scrub to any point real time within 10 milliseconds of any basically view in real time. So I have done a lot of stuff with WebSockets doing that kind of thing. And I will tell you, it would have been easier in DataStar by a mile, 100%. So I highly recommend, if you can do those kinds of things, if I've worked on those kinds of projects, right? And I would never touch WebSockets again. I'm really excited about web transport because it's solving a lot of things around quality of service. And it's basically a combination of what WebSockets is doing and what WebRTC does, but you're kind of combining the best of both worlds. So I actually have a personal thing after DataStar is done called DarkStar, which is basically making those type of connections declarative as well. So that's something that's in the long term I'll be looking at, but the reference implementation is in Go and it's not quite there yet for web transport. So just heads up that you could do this.
Is this stuff built into the HTTP package then, or are you building your own?
No, this just uses a regular Qi router. The nice thing about SSE especially is it's just like application JSON. It's text event stream, and there's a bunch of new lines, and you say flush. Like that's it. There's nothing special about it. So like there is a protocol on top of it.
I should use that. Okay, use the SSE protocol stuff.
Yeah, so the thing is there's a DataStar SDK built in so that it has all these nice little helper functions. So if you're using Temple, or if I have a GoStar, which is like a Go component thing, but it's a Fluent interface, or if you're just using raw strings, I would use the SDK that's built in because it has all these nice little helper features. Like for example, one of the things that is built in is the ability to do, you can just say set up an SSE and say SSE fetch URLs and just give it a list of URLs. It'll automatically generate pre-speculation rules for you and load those other pages or those other images. So there's an example on the DataStar website that says, you'll look at the prefetch example, it's a bunch of Pokemon. So when you start up, you load those initial Pokemon and it has a speculation rule of every single other Pokemon possible. So it's caching those in the background, even though you're doing a static website.
For what I want to do, I don't want to have any of that particular magic. I want to build a Go service that is sort of generic in terms of the socket communication, and we could build anything, but I'd love to then try to maybe leverage DataStar for a really simple, this is for learning, right? But I've done the SSE stuff for a service I built for Prediction Guard that's mimicking the OpenAI APIs. We take the writer, convert it to a flusher, send the status, and then get into a loop and just start flushing data sort of down, right? So
I mean, that's basically it. You just are able to do that with it just uses standard HTTP, like net HTTP, standard header, and basically you say SSE, the DataStar dot new SSE, and you give it the writer and the W and the R, right? Your writer and your request. And then you start sending down SSE merge fragments or merge signals or removing signals. All that stuff is available there. So one of the things that's really interesting, I think, for people is that I don't know how much you've seen people talk about like separation of concerns. And Carson's idea with HTMX was locality of behavior, like keeping things tight to where things are happening. So instead of being spread out into separate files, you're keeping them close. Well, there's nothing faster than or smaller than the locality behavior of DataStar. And what I mean by that is if you're doing a SQL request inside of your pulling out stuff from a like SQLite row, you can literally send your fragment right there. So you can have instant feedback. So instead of waiting till the end to get your response, you could be sending fragments immediately. So your locality of behavior between getting the row and rendering the fragment is literally the same line.
So I guess this whole next generation of slot machines are just big browsers, and they could be using DataStar.
I mean, technically, a lot of them already are. Most games that are made nowadays are built so that they run both in the browser and on the slot machines. Like slot machines are just Linux machines. I don't know if most people know that, but most of the time it's just a Linux box. But I will say that I'm the thing that I'm interested in, and it may be, again, my hubris from my youth, but I really want to help drive this, what I think of as almost a Web 4.0. Like I think Web 3.0 kind of failed and it's a bunch of blockchain stuff. I love blockchain, but the way it was done, I disagree with. But I want to move us back to the idea that the browser is a hypermedia framework and that you can stream data down. Because there's this idea that you have to have a SPA to be interactive, or you can build a static site with HTML. I think the idea for me in a Web 4.0 is the idea that you can do like hypermedia and do streaming, and those are not orthogonal. Like those things can be combined, and people have not done that yet. I don't know why. I think it's because of the tooling. As soon as they see what DataStar can do, someone's going to come up with a better idea of how to do it or some smarter way. But it's a pretty good start. So try it and tell me I'm wrong. But this is, I think, the future in that you can build things that are secure and responsive, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Have you looked at WebAssembly at all to help solve some of the both security and performance problems?
So yeah, I definitely have spent a lot of time there. My issue with it is that right now there's nothing, because you basically have to interact with the DOM through the JS, like there's a layer in between those two. And because of the way the WASM is built right now, there's no way to be faster than finely tuned TypeScript or JavaScript. It is literally, at best, it's going to be equal in speed. And I've done a lot of work in that space. I want there to be a better version. As soon as there's a GC available and they have things like SIMD and a couple of other things, there's a good chance that DataStar's internals would be rewritten in Go and be sent down. And then it'd be a little bit smaller, but it's already the smallest framework in existence. So it's not going to be that much of a difference. The one thing I think that's really valuable is that with WASM, you can start doing the bit, actually looking at the bytecode immediately. So the whole file doesn't have to come in before it starts streaming. So I think there's some things around the compiling the JIT stuff that happens in Turbofan. There's value there. But again, that's kind of minor because it's already the fastest framework there is. So
no, I'm starting to think like we're going to see DataStar in at SpaceX up in in Mars, man. When they're looking at their screens in Mars, all because that's all browser renderings. Like everything's browser, right, at this point. So
well, and the thing is that I think that we've been focusing on the wrong problem, and that's why originally I said, look, I'm just basically a 3D guy that kind of knows some, like I know some C and I know tools, but I'm not like a JS wizard, right? So my only thing that I always brought up with DataStar is that like, this is not my bag. I don't like JavaScript. Someone's got to do this better than me. Why hasn't nobody thought of this yet? And I don't know the answer to that because I feel this weird bias in my own head of like, either I'm really good at this or I'm really bad at it because I'm doing stuff that no one else in the space has done. And I don't know why. Because it seems very logical once you get into the weeds.
Well, you got to commit to building this, right? Like, I hate JavaScript too, but I don't do enough of it to commit to solving this problem. But I think we've seen since basically 2000, you've had to live in this sort of pain, right? In this space and pain, and you've never really escaped it. And so I think that's where all this sort of knowledge, wisdom, and then desire to work on it comes from. Like I didn't have this journey. If I got to work on something, I get somebody else like Kevin, get me this far, and then I clean it up, and it's not painful for me after that.
Well, and I think the thing that's always been interesting to me about the web is that I think it's this beautiful idea of a deployment sandbox. Like I've been doing web development before CSS existed, right? Like I came from the .com time, dealt with that stuff, and like I saw that this beautiful idea of a language or platform agnostic way of delivering assets and stuff that ties people together. The idea of hypermedia in that things link to the next state and the next state and the next state. There's something really amazing about that. And the fact that we've been almost convinced that you can't do that without a bunch of craziness. Like for example, DataStar, everything's a plugin. So there's probably 20 or 30 plugins, but all of that, I don't use NPM or node modules or any of that stuff. That's complicated. I don't want to do that. So Vite, which is the #1 way to build these things, under the hood, right, they use ESBuild. Guess what? ESBuild is a Go binary. And they also have a way to hook into it from a library. So the website, I just include ESBuild as part of it. So when you're clicking around the bundler and clicking on things, I do an ESBuild in the background, create the assets, just using Go. It's easy. Put it to a temp directory and then hash it and hand it off to you so that, only one person at a time. My thing is, I think sometimes you need outside perspectives to see the value in things. And people are like, oh, is this fast enough? I'm like, it's faster than Vite because it's just like, it's ESBuild. Like everything's faster. It's no dependencies. It's super small and it does all the things you need to do. So sometimes maybe it's an outside perspective of some circus guy is what you need. But I can't wait till someone that's really good at this stuff gets involved.
No, but I like knowing now that the engineering behind this and the problems you were trying to solve come from like 20 years of experience trying to solve these problems, not just for industry, but like for government, military, these types of things. And so this isn't like I just woke up one day and thought, let's do this. These are real problems I've experienced, and this solution's working.
Well, and it's working. And the nice part that I found, this is the part it's bad about messaging. Again, I'm not a marketing wizard, but the part that's kind of hard to explain to people that if it works for games and it works for real-time applications and real-time chat and all that, it's going to work for your CRUD app. Like they almost think that like that game development is some magic version of coding, and it's not. You're just have to say, I have to do less of this thing in this amount of time, or you have to do things that they would say, oh, well, that's a hack, or like, no, that's like showing them just the information they need to know at that moment, right? Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff that I think changes the way you look at the problem. And now that we're getting into, if you have that mental model of this works for games, it definitely is going to work for my CRUD app. Like that just means also you don't have to scale up to crazy things. It's going to cost you less. You're not going to have to set up multiple AWS containers to run your web server. Like you should be able to run your web server on up to huge scales, and it should be a non-issue. Like the way people build things makes it really complicated. Like trying to do this in Node and have a million different instances to be all be single threaded, and the cost of that in containerization and all that stuff, as opposed to just building a binary that runs and utilizes your machine. One way is a lot easier.
The way I've been thinking about it as you talk about just the data, like if you were streaming video, you might send every pixel, but on the next update, it's just what changed, right? Like you're not sending it over and over. Like you might on a certain frequency send everything again, but you're only sending what's changed over a certain period of time, which could be small. Like if you're watching a football game, it could be a small amount of pixels that have to be sent.
So, and here's the beauty of it. If you watch that talk that I'll link to you, but I'm updating thousands of elements with 3D graphics and all this stuff every single frame at 144 frames per second, and my timings are in the microseconds. Like it is just a non-issue. In fact, I took someone's snake game that they wrote in HTMX because it does polling. So they got it, said, hey, look, I made this thing that's 5 frames per second. And they're like, it might be able to get up to 8 or 10. And I said, well, I made a version that's 50,000 frames per second. And I found out that you can actually break the micro Q task of the browser if you go over 500. So that seems like a flex, but the thing is that just means that you can run so much more on, like you can do more with your hardware. You can have a better mental model because being on one machine is way easier. Having a mental model of like, I can break point any point in my app is so much easier than it is to try to distribute these things and do Docker composes and all this stuff for just a basic app. Like it's so much easier.
All right, we are out of time, Delaney. And like with many of my guests, I could keep going on and on and on. But yeah, I mean, we talked for like an hour and a half at this point.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. Didn't seem like very long.
It's insane. All right, a couple things as we close up. For anybody listening right now, we'll get it in the show notes. If anybody listened to this and then wanted to reach out, had a question or something, what's the best way for people to reach out?
Yeah, I am on, I guess I'm on Twitter as Delaney Gillilan is, of course, it's a long one. It's the DataStar CEO is what it is. And we do have a Discord channel where there's a lot of live active things happening. And then the website is datastar-dev or data-star.dev. So,
yeah, data-dash, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the best way. Like, holler at me. And it's also my first name, last name at Gmail if there's something specific that you need.
Brilliant. Okay, this is Delaney and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast, and we hope to hear from everybody again real soon.